In this video, you have stumbled into part 2 of a massive 3-hour video on spindle turning I created as part of the semester on learning to wood turn in my classroom series here on Worth Effort Woodworking. If you didn't see the first part of this video, don't worry. You can just jump right in here and actually learn what you probably came to the video to do. Techniques for using the spindle, the skew in spindle turning. But if you're new to the craft, not only would I highly suggest you go back and revisit my prerequisite course, maybe the Start Woodworking course, but definitely go back to the beginning of this semester of Start Wood Turning, because we will cover a lot of the machinery and stuff like that. In the first part of this video, I went into the specifics of the machinery and the skew, and the difference is on the techniques you use, the geometries, all that kind of affects it, and a lot of times why it doesn't really matter because of physics. And then I did a deep dive into the types of wood we use. All those are important if you want to progress down through the craft. But if you already learned it and you just want to learn a few ways to use a skew, just keep on viewing. Either way, the third part in this series is just some fun exercises, some homework for you that I hope you will turn into me on Instagram. So please enjoy part 2 of learning to turn spindles, starting with the skew. Okay, here's a trick I've been using forever for loading up stuff. I have a hard time finding the center of blocks or anything like that when I'm putting them between centers, because you're always kind of looking at the side, and it's hard to find center looking at it from the side. I mean, where's the center of that block, okay? A lot of people, have the pencil and they have those special center finders, stuff like those all work and stuff, but I'm kind of lazy. I typically have my awl somewhere around my lathe, and what I would do is I will stick there and I'll put it so that it is pointing to a corner, and then I'll put a finger right there and I'll just drag it back until those 3 other points, and there we go. There's my center, or close enough for me. It's just really, really quick. Now, if you're doing a production run that you're going to have all your blanks are identically sized, I just lay them flat on the table, find the center, make a line all the way across, flip them all the way over, do it like that. But for just getting the center to load up an odd piece, this little trick works pretty well. Now for something that I should do, but I don't. Loading it up on the drive center is a lot of pressure that you put on it to get those bike drive gears inside. So what you're supposed to do is take out your drive center, put it down on top, and hammer it in to get those little bite marks. That way, whenever you put pressure on it, you don't have to put as much pressure on those bearings. Now, I've also talked to the people that make these professional size ones, and they kind of, yeah, that's what you should do, but nobody really does. Lock it down here. If that doesn't lock down, or if you have a little bit of sawdust underneath here, it will slide back on you. And then just move it forward until it bites. Now, setting up your tool rest height is incredibly important. A skew, typically you will find that you turn a little bit more on top than you do your other spindle tools. But the thing is, if you're doing this a lot, you're not wanting to constantly have to lift this up and down. So a lot of times, or at least I find a happy medium where it is, so it's probably not ideal. But what they tell you is you want, of course, book smarts wise will tell you, you want your tool rest slightly above the midway point. So I'm looking 90 degrees to figure up here, and you're going to be turning about 11 o'clock on the lathe, okay? The problem I find is a lot of lathes are not adjustable height-wise, so you don't have control of where the center is on a lot of lathes. This lathe right here is actually set up a little bit too high. It should be, theoretically, your elbow should be right in center line of that right there. So I'm actually kind of up a little bit high, which kind of means I typically keep my tool rest a little bit lower than I probably should, and I turn a little bit lower right there. But that's also the ideal setup for my spindle gouge. So it's kind of like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But theoretically, your tool rest should be slightly above center line, and you should be planing with the skew right around the 11 o'clock, if that is a clock right there, okay? Start out there, adjust it a little bit, see if you're more comfortable one way or other. Everybody's gonna be a little bit different, but that's a good starting point. Now, in the beginning part of this series, we talked about the proper way to use tools, and specifically we use this spindle rough and gouge. And the procedure is always the same. It doesn't matter what tool you use, even the skew. It is going to be, you touch a tool to the tool rest, you touch the bevel to the wood, then you lift up until you see your cutting shavings coming across, you start engaging the cutting edge, and then you move. So it's A, B, C, D. Anchor the tool, touch the bevel, cut with the wood, and the direction you're going. A, B, C, D. You want to know the number one reason why people hate the skew? Because the skew is the most unforgiving tool we have if you don't follow those simple 4 steps. If you touch a wood without it touching the tool rest, if you touch the edge before you touch the bevel, okay? It's because each one of those steps is the brace for the next step. Touching the tool rest allows the tool to be stable, so when the force goes down, it goes down through the tool rest, the tool banjo, the blade, the legs to the ground, and not to you, because you are not strong enough to overpower 3 horses, which this thing has a 3 horsepower motor. You're not even strong enough to overpower a half a horse, okay? So don't even try. Tool rest, bevel, cutting edge, then the direction. And actually, cutting edge and direction almost happen simultaneously. If you don't touch the bevel to the tool before the edge, well, the edge is going to want to dig in, because the bevel is what's preventing the edge from wanting to go forward. It is your depth control. Just like on a hand plane, you have a blade and you have the wood or the metal that's holding it up. You're pushing across wood. That blade wants to dive in. It wants to go straight. It's the fact that you have that long bevel why you can take a nice smooth shaving. It's the bevel of the tool that allows you to do that one. So, I've said it earlier. I think that the skew has an undue reputation for being scary. It's scary because you don't follow those 4 simple steps. That's most of it. Now, in spindle turning, the skew really can't do everything you want to. You don't really need a spindle rough and gouge or even a spindle gouge. It'll do concave, convex, it'll do nice and flat, it'll cross cut, it'll plane, it'll do all those tricks. That's what's so wonderful about the skew. But other tools do have some benefits. Now, I'm going to kind of jump ahead on y'all. I'm going to show you 2 cuts, the planing cut and the peeling cut. We'll discuss a lot more of them in a second, simply because I have a pretty big block of wood right here, and some people are going to ask, well, can you just rough from a square with a skew? And yes, you can. In fact, it somewhat is more forgiving than other ways, because a lot of times you're turning air, so if you do get some of a catch, it kind of throws it back. It's not as bad because it's turning air. But there are 2 ways that I will rough out a piece if I'm going to do it with a skew, and then I'll tell you why I generally don't rough out with a skew. With a skew, you can generally plane, and if you go plane, you start with a corner because you're just kind of pushing it off. Otherwise, it kind of splits off. You kind of plane down. Like that, or you can peel it. Both of those methods work just fine. The reason why I don't do it is because I gift my shavings to neighborhood people. A lot of them raise chickens and rabbits and stuff like that. And the shavings that come off when you do, especially that planing method, they're kind of like long splinters, and they just kind of pierce, feathers and stuff like that. They hurt. Whereas all the other shavings you do, even the peeling and planing cuts, that just like this, when it's round, they're softer shavings. These, when you're doing it in the rough, because it's kind of going from air to stuff like that, it just kind of splits the wood off a bit, which makes it a little bit firmer, longer, and stuff like that. So the reason why I don't rough with the Skew is splinters. So I typically take it down with the Spindle roughing gouge, which we have discussed in the earlier videos. Which, even if you take your time on that last pass to try and get as smooth as possible, will never be as good a quality cut as with a Skew. So that's the best we can do with a Spindle roughing gouge. So now taking my Skew and just doing a slight pass on the end. Show you the quality difference and why you can basically, that's finish ready right there. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so let's take a step back. We've talked about the A, B, C, and D, right? But that's not all there is to understanding controlling the Skew. There's a lot of little elements that some people don't really talk about. For the most part, a lot of tools you use, you're kind of facing the lathe straight ahead. If I'm doing the Spindle roughing gouge, I'm kind of somewhat squared to the lathe. But when you're using the Skew, it kind of depends upon which direction you're going. If I'm going to the right, my shoulders are kind of a little bit about 45 degrees. If I'm going to the left, my shoulders are about 45 degrees the other way. And that doesn't matter if I'm using the long point or the short point in the planing action, or closer to those two areas. It's just kind of, you're doing that one. For the simple reason, the movement across your work happens at your hips, at your legs, your upper body. That's the direction you're moving. If I'm planing this direction, my shoulders are here, I'm moving my body. My body can maintain a very smooth action. And that's why we talked about earlier that you want the handle a certain width so that it can brace against your body, and your elbow and your arm can kind of lock in, and it can all move at once. It's your body that allows you the control at that very cutting edge to maintain the angle you've rotated your plane at, the angle it's being presented to the wood, the contact with the tool rest, the wood, and everything. It's the stabilizing effect that moves everything in. Your fingers and hands do not have the dexterity to control this entire movement consistently as you're moving across. It's your body. And hopefully you have as much mass as I do to give you the absolute best stability possible. Next up, if at all possible, don't hunch. If you're having to do this action to control stuff like that, you're going to be so tired at the end of the day. Get yourself a good set of glasses that are somewhat reading glasses so that they're at the distance of a book right there, so you don't have to hunch down to see the details, that kind of stuff. Because that's generally what's happening, is you're trying to see when you're hunching and getting close. You want to sit upright, keep your shoulders relaxed so that you can move. That way you can do it all day. You're not going to be as tired and stuff like that. It also, when you're hunching, if you have to move, you kind of move your shoulders and hips opposite. If you're upright, everything moves together. Okay? So there's a reason why for that. Just maintain a nice, natural, upright position when you're at the lathe. And if you can't, well, that's the time you need to adjust the height of your lathe or the tool rest or something to get yourself so that you can. Or just get better glasses. So your body is a stabilizer, your feet and hips control the motion, the movement, but your rear hand controls all edge motion. How you're planning, all that kind of stuff. Your front hand is just kind of a pivot point fulcrum to keep everything consistent. It's your fine-tuned dial up here. It will tell you if you've moved even a fraction of a millimeter forward, backwards, how you're rotating it. But the fact that you have your hand in contact with the tool rest and the tool itself, that movement can be told. If your fingers come off the tool rest at all, it is very hard to tell if you've moved at all. If you move a half a millimeter, your fingers can feel the sliding action. So that's where the control, the manipulation happens, but the movement happens back here because the fulcrum is up here. The back action right here kind of moves a bit. You can move the back a whole bunch, and that barely moves the edge. If you're trying to do all movement up here, well, you have no leverage up here. So a minor movement with your front hand makes a big movement on the cutting edge, and you will lose all control. That little diatribe right there about how we control this tool via our bodies, via our leverage, via our stabilization, our fulcrum movements, our adjustments side to side, all that, that's probably the biggest thing you can take away from this video, because that will give you the power and the control to do everything else. It's those little elements right there that seem to be missing in a lot of people that seem to struggle with this tool. And when I see demos or other YouTube videos where people are showing, hey, look what I learned, stuff like that, and you can see their hands are off the tool rest, and they're getting it done, but they're working hard. And then you see these professionals, they're coming up here and they're just thinking, oh, look, you can even let go of your hand. It's because they've got it balanced in so many other different areas that it all works so well. What that experience gives you is to trust all those basics of how to stabilize and control the edge. Because trust me, if it has had to do with eye-hand coordination, I would not be able to do this. For one, I only use one eye. That's a kind of a birth defect. But I don't have the depth perception a lot of people do. And I shake all the time. I just don't have very good eye-hand coordination, but because of the foundation of the position, the body movement, that kind of stuff, I can actually get stuff done. Maybe not to the level of everyone else, but I'm confident with it. So here we go. Let's start with a few of the basic cuts. A skew, if you've watched my 4 cuts videos, can do 4 cuts. Kind of makes sense. You can do a slicing cut, you can do a peeling cut, you can do a planing cut, and you can do a scraping cut. I don't like doing scraping cuts because they dull the tool quite a bit, but let's really focus on those other 3, starting with a slicing cut. The slice is wood turning's version of a cross cut. It is basically you're going across the end grain, perpendicular to the grain of the wood. And if you've ever seen a cross-cutting saw in normal woodworking, basically it consists of a bunch of little chisels, one facing one way, one facing the other way. And what it's doing is it's slicing a line on both sides and then letting the weakness of the wood between grain, they just flake off. This right here is basically severing fibers and hoping some other force will kind of chip the wood off. So generally when you see slicing action, it's to the air. There's only so much wood we can take off before you get resistance. So you have to have a lot of less resistance on one side to get a clean cut on the other side of the blade. So a lot of people learn to do a slicing cut with a V-cut. And what that is you kind of start out and you just put the wood into the, put the tip of the tool into the wood, touch the tool A, B, C, D, come up right around the 11 o'clock and you kind of pivot it in. But you'll notice I can push as hard as I want now and all I'm going to do is burn it, okay? It does not go down any deeper. After a little while, the edges of the tool right here on either side of that edge are pushing the fibers out this way, and it gets to a point where this has more resistance. So if you want to go any deeper, you have to cut into air so that the wood actually chips off to the side. It's not a shaving, it's actually a breaking it off, severing the fibers into the air, okay? Which is why if you want to do a deep V cut, you basically go down, you start it out, and then you come over to the sides. And you'll come down one side, then come down the other side, and every time you go, you can go a little bit deeper, but the shavings are going off into the air. So when I'm making a slice and cut, basically I have one side that's turning into air. You know, on the end, it's always going to be over here. This side actually becomes a chip breaker. This side becomes the bottom of your hand plane. This is what's going to control the direction. So on this side is the side I want to be pristine, and that's what I'm going to be aiming with. And on this side, as the wood fibers are sliced, this side kind of pushes them out and breaks a chip off. The thing you are focusing when you're doing that is on the wood, you want the very tip to hit the V-cut, but you want to put the ever so slightest angle to the side like that. I'm totally exaggerating because you do not want this edge to touch as you're coming down. That will give you probably the nastiest catch in our whole design, and it'll basically just go like that on you really, really fast. But if you're cutting it, like if I'm trying to cut something plain, I'll get this lined up, I'll get it started, and when I'm talking about it angling over, we're only talking about that much. The other thing is, because we are using this as a chip breaker, well, we actually need this tip to come in first before the fibers come off the side. So a lot of times you'll see us, we'll start out here, and the path we take is more of an arc towards the center. Because if I start getting past this point, all of a sudden the triangle wedge is lower than the tip. Can you see that? So then it will kind of break off the fibers behind this, and you'll get this kind of tear out. So what we need to do is we need to bring that edge down farther so that the tip is below the triangle as we're coming towards that center section. And that way we're breaking after we slice. So it could look something like this. Coming over, I get my angle right. In this instance, it's absolutely perpendicular. I'll start the cut, and then I'm going to slightly come to the side, and then I'm going to arc towards the center and hope I get a very clean cut. See where that tear out started? That's right when I started arcing, so see if we can do a better job there. Vibrations, I wasn't moving at a good speed. If you start getting those spirals, that means you're probably going a little bit too fast. So here's another angle. I'm going to aim with the plain bottom bevel, let the chip breaker side do its will, and as I get started, I'm going to twist that plane a little bit away so that I don't risk this edge cutting into the wood. So here we go. Pardon me, I'm doing this around the camera so I can't quite see. So I line it up, and you'll see that slight twist. That's all it is. It's an ever so slight twist. One more time. Enter the wood, pivot away, push forward, and then come down towards the center. And that vibration tells me I had a little bit of a spiral going on. Yep, you can see it right there. I was pushing a little bit too hard because I was looking in the camera again. A little bit better. I will say an absolute perpendicular slice is the hardest thing I do to get it straight off the blade, ready to rock and roll. I always have to touch mine up. If you can add just a little bit of an angle, maybe just coming in or something like that, it is always so much easier because you get a little bit of that planing action. Now, the slice is done with the tip. I have heard of people using the low tip, the low end of the blade, the short end, excuse me. Never seen anybody do it really successfully. I do know that you can, in transitioning from like a planing to a slicing action, you can actually use a blade, but most people will push forward to engage the tip whenever they're doing those kind of cuts, and I'll show that to you later on. But this is a good thing to practice, especially if you want to do any kind of furniture making, because you'll do a perpendicular slice quite a bit there when you're transitioning from squares to rounds. The next cut I want to talk about uses a lot of the same very body mechanics as that slice and cut. And that's a peeling cut. And I kind of think it's the easiest thing to do on the lathe with the skew. And it's the one that shocks people the most because you can waste so much material away so quickly with this. Now, and basically it's the same exact thing we did with the slice, where we've got our hand here and we're just kind of moving at an arc towards the center. The only difference is we're engaging the blade itself. When you do the peeling cut, generally you use your long point towards whatever block of wood you have, and the short point going into air. I've never really seen anybody do it like this for the simple reason you have to get the angle of your edge perpendicular to the wood to be at most effective, and you'll see why in a second. So, because people like Richard Rafin, who sharpen their chisels straight across, they can put their chisel straight perpendicular to the wood and just come straight down. Those people like me that put a slightest of bevel this way, we have to kick our chisel to the side a little bit in order to get that parallel. So I get that front half parallel, and you can use all the blade if you're brave enough. I never am. I very rarely use more than 3/4 of the blade in a peeling cut. And basically all it is doing is it's using that edge of the blade to actually split the wood, just as if you were taking an axe and splitting it along the grain. It's just breaking it off. That's why I can do so much, because axes remove huge chunks at the same time. This is taking advantage of the wood and letting it break away just in a very fine amount. So we're controlling the amount, so it looks like a shaving, but it's actually just lots of splinters that are coming off, that we're splitting off. And it looks kind of like this. A, B, lower bevel, C, cutting edge, D, direction. And once again, just like when we were slicing, it's kind of like you start it going, and then you kind of pushing through, but as you push through, you're slowly lowering down. Okay? So here it is in live action. A, B, C, D. Now you look at the edge and you see how it's all kind of fuzzy and stuff like that, because that's fibers that actually broke going inside this way. It's not breaking right at the edge. It's sometimes breaking on the inside. But it wastes away so much material, and they look like shavings. See if I can peel one off. But they fall apart almost instantly because they aren't shavings. They are little splinters. Can you see that? They're just little splinters all over the place. So I also want you to pay attention to one other thing, because this is going to answer a lot of y'all's questions about riding the bevel. You hear that term over and over and over, and all of us are talking, when we explain it, about riding this bevel right here. That's the misconception right there, because that's what it feels like. And in operation, that's the bevel we focus on. But in actuality, you're going to notice that whenever I'm making a cut, this bevel right here is in the air. It's actually riding on that bevel right there, slightly behind the edge. Because if it wasn't on that bevel, this edge would, the blade would want to dive in. It's that portion that's pushing back right behind the cutting edge. So it's still riding on the bevel. The cutting edge is wanting to dive in, and that's what's preventing it from going any deeper. And you control it, just that few millimeters right there. And the reason is quite simply, this is sharpened on an 8-inch grinding wheel. So this curve right here is 8 inches. This is not 8 inches. It's obviously quite a bit smaller. The only time this bevel will ride while this edge is cutting is on shapes that are larger than 8 inches. So it has to ride on the smaller bevel behind the blade. And I'll get the camera as close as I can so that you can see those two actions. So here we go. And I actually don't like doing this cut slowly. Whenever I do it, I'm going to do it once at my normal speed, and then I'll do it once slowing down so you can see the bevel action. It feels more comfortable going fast in this cut. So A, B, C, and D. Okay, the lower bevel touches, cutting edge, but you can see the lower bevel is off the tool, and as I go down, the bevel right by the blade is there. This hand right here is just keeping it on the tool rest. Can you see that? I think that one kind of element where all of us are telling you all to ride the bevel or you're going to get a catch, and then they see us turning and everyone looks, hey, that bevel's off, and it just doesn't quite get. The sensation is you're riding the bottom bevel. That's what it feels like. And touching that bottom bevel, first, make sure that the edge is far away from the blade. You actually have to come back and lower that bevel down to get the blade. So you can pivot off of that bottom bevel right until it hits the point where the cutting edge is. But it's kind of a two-stage thing. You have the tool rest, the bottom bevel, and then when you get to that top bevel, it kind of shifts to there and you don't feel it. It is so minor. And that's also one thing that kind of frustrates a lot of people when they watch more experienced people. Because more experienced people have done it so often that they skip touching the bottom bevel and go straight to that micro bevel right below the blade and just start cutting. And it looks like they're just going and just throwing the edge into the tool, and it works perfectly for them. But they are actually touching that micro bevel down close to the edge first and then engaging. All of us, while we are learning, for the first decade we are doing it, touch the bottom bevel first, not that top bevel. Focus on that bottom bevel, because even after all these years, I can't feel that top bevel when it transitions from the bottom to top. It feels like I'm just riding the same one. And I wish I could figure out a better way to explain it. I just don't. Now, there is another peeling cut that I do that I don't see a lot of people talk about. It might be because some people consider it somewhat dangerous, but I think it's really pretty safe. But it's one of those cuts that I would never do with a straight beveled skew. I only do it with a curved bevel skew, and I think you will understand why when you see me do it. Because it is a peeling cut I do on the move. So earlier I told you could rough it out with a skew using that peeling cut. So now that you've seen how I do a peeling cut, maybe you can understand what I'm doing when I'm roughing it out and why you get those splinters. So you come over here, you get it spinning at what you feel is a safe speed. You come over, you touch it down. Because it's splitting and you're doing it where it's going from air to the thing, it just kind of, it sometimes will give you long splinters. I just don't like doing it, but it's completely, it's safe. Make sure your glasses are over your eyes. Notice, body against hand. This hand is pushing down to keep it flat. I do not want it tilting whatsoever. Lower bevel, cutting edge, progression. All movement happens down here. And this is how I generally do the peeling cut in motion. You'll see me, I've done that. The blank itself is kind of rough. So on that last cut, I want you to notice, I'm taking the shavings are coming off of this edge right here, because that's all that's touching the wood. And this is in the air. So I peeled it down. And at this point, I will rotate my back hip in the angle of the blade. So now, you see where the shavings, they're now coming across the middle. But that middle is arced right there. So now this tip is in the air, as is this tip in the air, about an equal amount. So I can now take that skewed cut and I can go side to side. And making sure, this is one of those cuts where you have to have some depth control. And my hand down here is making sure I do not go any deeper than I need to. And I can just kind of come straight across and just kind of even things out. Both directions. This will not give you a very clean cut. It is very, very rough. It's very matte, I guess you could say. But the only reason I can do it safely is because of this curve. Because when I'm doing it, the only shavings that are coming across is in the dead center. See that? It's coming off in the center. So as I move, if there's a high point, it kind of ramps into it, the cut. I use that cut a lot when I'm doing handles, not when I'm just smoothing out from roughing, because I'm wasting a lot of material for like a handle on a mallet, and then you just want to even it out before you start working with your detailed planing cuts, which require a little bit better starting surface than a rough, uneven, jagged edge. If you are just starting out, I would probably steer away from that peeling cut in motion until you get some control with your depth adjustment, because it's all the depth adjustment that is the difference between getting a catch and making that cut successfully. So now that I've got another round blank, how about we start talking about planing cuts? In my mind, planing cuts are the most technical of all the cuts we do with a skew. And it's probably the one that people have the most problems with. But remember those A, B, C, Ds. If you remember those, it won't be too bad. The key thing is that you got to really focus on is always turning downhill towards the center, because that, if your grain is straight, like we got good wood, so the grain is running straight everywhere. Well, if you're going towards the center, you are always laying fibers down, okay? So you're always going with the grain. If you ever start trying to plane uphill, that's when you're planing where fibers are really, really weak and they're going to split on you and fly off on all that kind of stuff. And that can be kind of somewhat tricky if you have wavy grain and you're trying to make a perfect cylinder. Because if the grain's waving this way, that's great if you're planing this way. But if you're planing this way, that means you're going uphill and it will start getting tear out on you. That's one of the cool things about the Skew, though, is because you can adjust the tear out by, if wood's coming this way, by changing your angles of approach. And if you get it all the way to the point where you're peeling it, a lot of that major tear out goes away. You'll just have to do a little bit more sanding. But if you pick good woods to start with, you don't have that problem. Because you need the bevel first, you can never start in the air and start in cutting. You always have to start on the wood and cut through. If you need to make a perfectly cylinder, well, a lot of times you start one direction and then you'll come back the other direction for the last little bit you didn't touch to make that perfect cylinder and plane off the wood, not on, okay? So here we go. A, notice I'm putting the corner down. I touch the bevel down. B, I lift the bevel blade back until I see shavings. C, and then I do my direction. D, in an ideal situation, the angle of this wood coming down and touching that blade at a point where it is 45 degrees. A, B, C, D. Now, did you notice where the shavings were coming off? There's this idea of the supported edge in wood turning. This is a supported edge. We're not talking about grain direction and supported grains. This is a supported edge. There's a lot of support in wood turning. And it's best explained, as many of y'all have seen in my other videos, with the spindle rough and gouge. So I'm going to touch my spindle rough and gouge on the tool rest. The only part of this blade that is supported is right there, right in line where it is touching the tool rest, right there. I can press as hard as I want and it isn't going to rotate. But notice this edge over here. It is in the air. The tool is touching down here. So if I push over here, it wants to rotate and there's nothing I can do about that. It wants to rotate around. Same over here. But what happens if I rotate this tool to that point? Now I can press all I want on this edge and it's not going to move because that is where the tool is touching the tool rest. So it's at the bottom point, no matter how I have the tool engaged, that is supported. If I touch the blade to wood at any other point, this tool is going to want to rotate on me because, once again, I am a wimp and there's no way I can overpower even half a horse, much less 3. It's going to take that tool from me and do what it wants with it. I think that's what we call a catch. Well, with the Skew, the obvious reason why we call it a Skew is because of that angle. And we presenting that angle at a different angle, which is 45 degrees, means we have to cant it a little bit. So how we can't touch the tool to the tool rest and where we cant it depends upon what is supported. So notice, if I touch the tool to the tool rest on the long end and I want to do a slicing cut, well, guess what? That slicing edge is supported. If I were to somehow do this and touch this tail edge, well, where's the support? It's way over here. It's going to want to crank it all the way back on me. So the same thing, whenever I touch that tool rest, that bottom edge, and look at where the engagement point is. Right about a third of the way down. That is what is touching. So whenever, depending upon how I rotate the blade and where I have the angle, tells me what portion of the blade is going to be supported. If I want to do a planing cut on the the leading edge, I can touch on this side and then notice where I'm touching and where it is going to engage. If I engage the blade back here on that side, it obviously is going to crank underneath me. So once again, from this angle, let's turn the speed way down. I touch my bevel, I raise it up until I see shavings coming off, And I want those shavings at least about right at the 1/3 part. Some people will say from a half all the way down. I like it about a third. And if I do that one, it is completely stable. Okay? And then I can just move. But if I rotate it a little bit farther forward, it wants to spiral on me. If I rotate it a little bit more, that tip is going to catch on me. Okay? So you get a nice sweet spot where you can just maintain that cutting edge fairly easily. Notice finger is on the tool rest and my back is kind of pushing it along, putting a little bit of back pressure, and that's important for a more advanced cut later on. So let's crank the speed up a little bit and get this cleaned off. Notice, even when diving deeper, by rotating it through, I'm focusing on keeping that cutting edge at the 1/3 part. If I've got that one, my tip is in the air and the lower tip is in the air, and I can make a planing cut all the way around the corner. Nice and safe. Did y'all see that right there? That little spiral shavings? I want you to notice where the shavings were coming off. Was it coming off at the 1/3 point, or did I migrate it all the way to that tip right there by bringing it around so that tip was in the supported area? I'm making planing. All of a sudden, where is it coming off the blade? Okay, but that tip is supported right there because of the angle. That is a planing cut done on the point. And that spiral is telling you that. But the downside to that is look at the finish. It's never going to be as smooth when you do it off the tip. I mean, we're getting a little bit of light reflection, but and you can also sometimes get these spiral marks because of that. So let me do half of it with the edge so you can see a difference. So I come off right there so we can see this is going to have a lot more of a shine than this over here because it's so much smoother. And just so y'all can see the difference, this time I'm going to do the same cut except I'm going to do the long end, the long tip. But the wood being presented to the edge, because of the way I'm having to kick my thing all the way back, is still coming across at 45 degrees. So I'm still going to touch the bevel, come back down, and right below the center point, come over and do a nice planing cut. And as you can see, it's still a glass. It doesn't really matter which way you want to go. Most people feel more comfortable keeping the long end high than low. But you can go both ways. Or if you don't want to do that one, there's no reason why you can't just turn it around. Now, I want y'all to notice something. Y'all can see in the reflection, this is pretty straight because you're looking at the tool rest. I keep my tool rest parallel with my lathe bed. That's how I can tell when I'm getting something parallel, is because I just look at the comparison. Also, my finger running across means it's going to be parallel if it's aligned with my tool rest. Okay, now just to show you one quick little thing. As we said earlier, I've got a nice little curve right here, and we're always going downhill when we plane. We never want to come back uphill for any reason whatsoever, because you can't plane uphill, right? You always have to go downhill. Okay? Coming back around, you can never come back uphill. You're never going to work. Always downhill. Never uphill. That's just something that some of y'all might want to play around with. It's technically called a controlled catch. You're just putting a little bit of back pressure, but as you get control of your tool more and more and more, that's a little skill builder. Because basically all you're doing is you're controlling how much pressure it wants to push this way by how much you rotate into the wood. And if it's starting to get away from you, you just rotate out. It's actually pretty simple, but it freaks people out a lot bit. But strangely, you can get an even better finish that way. You didn't hear that little tip from me. The final cut we're going to talk about is a scraping cut. I don't do that with the Skew. There are better tools called scrapers that are for that kind of cut. But sometimes when you're just kind of turning, you just have a little bit and you're too lazy to walk the 3 feet over to grab a scraper, you can do it with the Skew, because the Skew is technically just a very steep negative rake scraper. A negative rake scraper has bevels on both sides so that the point is a little bit more acute. This is extreme. And all we need to do is make sure that this angle right here that we present to the wood is negative, meaning less than 90 degrees, meaning we're kind of scooping up into it. Because anytime you get it positive, which on a Skew, because you had that angle right there, it doesn't take too much to get it positive, you're going to get a catch because that edge is going to want to dive in. Generally, the only times you see me doing this is if I've just planed off a ledge and I've got a really sharp bevel, I'll just flip it over and do a quick little thing. But it looks something like this. We've planed a nice surface, it's leading off, we come over here, and oh my, that's a really sharp edge. I'm probably going to cut myself if I touch that. So I'm going to flip this over, make sure that level is 90 degrees. Now, because of this right here, I might have my tool rest lower, but let's try and figure it out. Right there, my tool is going down. That is even, but it is not even to the wood. We have to make it perpendicular to the wood, less than 90 degrees to the wood. So I've got to aim this bevel for slightly below the center line, and then I can use it as a scraper and put a little bevel on the edge. You can do a scraper anywhere on your tool, right like that. But watch what happens. Okay, I just scraped that 3 times after I had planed it. So now let's go back and try planing it again and see what kind of result we get. I can already feel it is dull because it's wanting to push back on me a lot more. And the kind of cut I got is, it's nowhere near as smooth. So with just that amount of scraping, I've dulled my Skew. Don't scrape with your Skew. So, in review, we have a peeling cut. Pretty much always parallel with the grain because it is splitting action. I really can't see any other application for that. You have a slicing cut, which can be parallel or perpendicular with the grain rotation, or you can come in at angles. You have a planing cut. And you have a scrape. Don't scrape. So what kind of shapes can you make with those? Well, generally we're either talking about straight lines or convex or concave lines. You know, the slicing action on a piece of wood, you can go straight down to create sharp corners fairly easily. You can create a straight line by planing. So we would have a slice and then a planing action. Kind of boring, okay? You can create gentle curves with a planing cut, both concave and convex. And you can create what a lot of people struggle with a Skew, are beads and coves. beads being concave curves, coves being convex curves. And you can do both with a skew, though I will tell you, I do not do coves very often, or I should say tight coves very often with a skew. Something like these, my plain handles where you have a cove here and a slight cove here and stuff, all that's done with a skew, but really tight, intricate stuff, that's the nature of a spindle gouge. So let's go try those shapes. Okay, if we have a kind of a straight if you want to do either a gentle taper or a gentle cove or a gentle rolling bead, if I want to go this way, I'm never going to start at this end. I'm going to slowly work my way up into it. I'll take a little bit, a little bit, a little bit more, and that will give me the taper I want. Same with a gentle cove. I will often I'll start a little cove over, I'll come back, and you're taking little bites. You're slowly working up to the desired shape you want. Same with if you're doing like coming into a straight edge. If, for example, I want this right here to be kind of an inside corner, I'm not going to start there. I might come over and peel away some material just to waste it away, coming up to that point. I can then taper into it. And if I want to do a cove, I just kind of start a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And before I get to the final shape, I'll start coming into this edge, and I'll slowly start clearing it out with my slicing cuts and get a nice crisp edge that way. But I work up to my desired goal. And now I can add that gentle taper. Come back in and clean it all up and get the desired goal. I also want you to pay attention to something. You know, when you're planing, you're doing that bottom third, right? But a lot of times when I'm coming up to the corners, I will slowly work my way down on the cutting edge until I'm actually slicing in a planing cut. And then I can do a slight undercut. And that creates a really cool shadow in my opinion. So I'm going to clean this up so I get that fresh edge, so I can take that undercut away a little bit. Okay, now doing that gentle cove, pay attention to where the shavings are coming off the blade. I will start up here, bevel, get that cutting edge. I'm making sure that the cutting edge is below that center point right here. If I want to go even farther back, I need to come back a little bit more, but I want to come in, get that cutting edge, see where it's at. Can you see that on the camera? I can dive down a little bit deeper if I want to, turn it around, and as I come into that corner right there, I bring that point up. And see, now I've got that feathering on the edge because I'm slicing, I'm not planing, and I can undercut that to create that individual shadow line. Now, that's something you see a lot of times in my work. Also, you see these ribbons right here. That's generally why you don't do too steep a cove, because what's happening is I'm really having to put a lot of pressure on this bottom bevel, and I'm actually crushing those fibers, because you'll notice they'll start out smooth, and the farther back I go, you can see I'm doing damage to the wood with that back corner to create that steeper bevel with see, it's starting out smooth, and then all of a sudden you're going to start seeing lines coming into it as I come around. because I'm really pressing down on that bevel to create that edge. Now, technically, getting a tighter and tighter cove would be advantageous with a narrower skew, simply because you have so far on the where the cutting edge is, and you're rubbing that bevel. So there's just a different. It's just a physics that distance of the bevel is wider. So there's only so much, at least I can turn there. But once again, the coves are, the way the specialty of the spindle gouge. So generally when we start getting into tight coves, that's where I turn to that tool. But a nice long gentle cove, the Skew is the perfect tool for those. And then just to show that point again, I'm going to try and clean this up with my 1-inch Skew. So yeah, I touch the bevel first and it kind of jumped back. I touch the edge first, so it kind of jumped back on me. So bevel, kind of edge it in. And I also want you to notice that cutting edge angle, it's a little bit scraping too as I come in. I just can't get a smooth corner with that. So I come in right there and you see there's a little hump right there. It's just not that great. So I come back with my just 3/4 inch. Not that much smaller than my 1 inch. And notice how much tighter and smoother I can get that. Pretty easy. It can just, because it's got because this distance is shorter, that distance is shorter, and it allows me to create a little bit tighter curve. But still, that's not very tight as far as a concave corner. An even narrower one. See how the back end of that corner, it's the back of this chisel that's doing that. Here's a trick I've heard done. I'm actually going to round over that back bevel on this one. Added a slight curve to that bottom bevel, and let's see if it'll take care of that. Nope. Still does it. So there you go. Scientific proof that tight concaves are the realm of the spindle gouge, at least in my hands. Oh, and FYI, if you're like me and you work farmers markets or something like that, all these little offcuts like this, save them. You can put them in, 1 gallon plastic bags. And those little things right there, smokers love them. Barbecuers like them. I also take them camping with me because a lot of times you can't bring firewood, but with a little stove like this, I can cook a meal with just a handful of them. You can see I keep a whole bunch of them. Beads, on the other hand, are the specialty of the spindle gouge. Of the Skew. Now, a lot of times when you do beads, it's kind of the same principle where you kind of work up to them. So you have your board right here. A lot of times if you're wanting to turn a bead like that, if it's larger than, 1/4 inch or something like that, many times you'll start out with a V-cut and you'll just come down like that, and the V-cut will take care of almost 1/4 of most beads. And then you just have to worry about this section right here and this section right there. And it's really easy to do because you can use a planing cut to take off just that little bit of material. using a planing cut to take off a lot of material, even I run the risk of getting a kickback because it just kind of wants to dive in, because that's what you're doing when you're taking off a lot of material. You're diving into the wood. So if you can use a little bit quicker slicing cut to do that, you can. I will say this though, you can slice the whole bead, but you're typically doing it on the short side, the low point of the skew. And in that instance, you know, my skew right here, it's straight and then curves down. We got a point right here. That point right there isn't that big, okay? But if you were to have a straight blade, whether it is, you know, kind of steep or what, all of a sudden that point right there is pretty pronounced. So it's easier to do a bead off the point with a straighter skew than it is with a curved skew. Every shape has its pluses and minuses. It's just, it might be because I use a curved skew that I tend to do my beads off of the edge, not the point. So if I was going to roll up a bead into like a narrower straight, a lot of times you will see me, I'll make a slight cut right there, and then I will plane this down somewhat, or peel this down. And then I will cut the corner with a slice. And then you'll see me start, and I want you to notice, pay attention to this point and this edge right here, because I am focusing on keeping the shaving coming off right there and keeping these in the air. And I have to maintain motion. The moment I stop moving that blade, it's going to want to dig in, and it'll dig in up here, and it'll want to run on me. So when I'm turning that corner, bevel, edge, I ride it up, I'm keeping that edge straight, just like that, okay? And when I end up, I've got my edge, but notice this bevel right here is down that way. So as I rotate around, I'm bringing the back of my handle around, keeping this plane over the fork. I will admit, to me, those tight beads like that, that total rotation and movement at the back of the handle is the hardest cut for me to do and not get any catches or runbacks. It's going to happen. So I think it's worthwhile to practice, because look at this finish. Can you see that? I mean, that finish is just really, really nice. Now you can also do the same cut with that lower edge as I told you about. And the indicator of that lower edge is you'll see those little kind of onion rings, I call them, proceeding from the edge. I struggle with this, but it's probably due to the shape of my skew. So I can come over here, I can pick up that edge and rotate around. And once again, you end up kind of running the edge around, focusing on keeping the edge off the wood, and then aiming the bevel. 3 different things at the same time. But look at the difference on the finish. To me, see how it's much more matter, and I always get those lines because you're moving off of a single point instead of a broad edge. So those, typically when I do it that way, I'm going to have to sand a little bit. Now, as I said, in my mind, the bead, especially really tight beads, are the harder project to do. And a lot of people I know will use that slicing action to do the 45 and then just round them over. And really small beads, a lot of times they're just, you do the general shape with here and you refine it with sandpaper. Even the pros do it that way. The really, really tiny beads on like finials and stuff like that. But for, half-inch, 1-inch beads, that kind of stuff, you're going to struggle for a little while. But it only takes a little bit of practice. And there is no reason at all that you can't get paid for doing a little bit of practicing. If you're like me and you sell at art markets and stuff like that, or you want to batch out a bunch of gifts for the nieces and nephews. Just do a few projects, and here are a few simple ones that you can do that will allow you to practice those kind of techniques.